Hi, my name is Sandy Ward, VP of Engineering at Powered by People, and I'll be your moderator today. Powered by People is a mission-driven, venture-backed company that's connecting makers and small batch manufacturers from around the world with the North American wholesale market. We have over 600 makers around the world in our marketplace now, and are in 50 different countries, and we're growing strong. So looking forward to hear about some of the mistakes that we can avoid in our growth stage as we double our team over the next 4 months. The panel today is leading engineering in growth stage companies. Everything breaks at scale, especially with humans, right? What was true yesterday when you double engineering team is not true anymore. I mean, any team works that way. And so I think we get to learn a lot from how it impacts humans and how systems can help offset that. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully we'll get into some of the specifics so you can see exact examples of where things are, as well as the more general structures that can be applied in different scenarios. So I'll introduce our panel members today, and then we'll have a lightning round where they'll talk about an overview of their company and where they're at and the stages they're at. So Steptoe is VP Engineering at Wealthsimple. Wealthsimple is one of the biggest fintechs in Canada. I think it's a very well-known brand at this point in time. And they're bringing financial services to be accessible and affordable to all Canadians. Anne has over 20 years of experience on the engineering side, a lot of focused on infrastructure, QA. She has a strong passion for DEI, leadership development, and developer happiness. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ryan Fox, VP of Engineering at Super, formerly Snap Commerce. Good name change, by the way. Ryan's overseeing product engineering, platform engineering, infrastructure, and tools. Super is a mobile commerce and fintech platform focused on saving people money who actually need to save, not just people who want to save. They're one of Deloitte Technology Fast 50. They raised over $100 million to date. Ryan's a graduate from Western University. He earned the Governor General's Academic Award, as well as a gold medal in electrical engineering and medical biophysics. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Dileshni Jayasinghe, who's Director of Engineering at PagerDuty. She is running the automated product suite. PagerDuty, as many of us know, empower developers, DevOps, IT, and business leaders to prevent and resolve business impact incidents. I'm sure we've all had an outage once in a while, and PagerDuty can come in handy. Previously, she worked at Unada, acquired by Instacart, FreshBooks, among others. She's passionate about working with local tech organizations that promote diversity and learning. Partnering with Anya. Hello?
Anya.
Anya? She co-founded and ran a successful tech meetup called Explore Tech for 5 years. Jayasinghe, welcome. All right, and now we'll start the lightning round. Anne, over to you.
Sorry.
We'll hear more about each company, like how you're leading your engineer, the approaches to growth that you're taking, and maybe the current state of your company and where you're looking at growing, or in what you have you grown in the past year.
Yeah, so I actually came from the Weather Network and joined Wealthsimple about 14 months ago, specifically because they were scaling. So I wanted to be part of that environment. I had not been part of a high growth company before. And it was an amazing learning experience for the past 14 months. So there were times when we were onboarding 60 to 80 people in a cohort, which we had every 2 weeks, and half of them would be engineers. I think what I learned during that time is really about having the right automations and information available in place so that the new people would know where to go, and all of the existing engineers that were there were not constantly being asked, like, how do I do this? Where do I find that? And that was sort of the biggest learning for me in this high growth scale environment. And right now we've slowed down our hiring. We're not hiring as many people as we were about 8-10 months ago. But I think the best practices, as I was talking to Sandy about earlier, was really about interviewing best practices and making sure that your team knows how to do that really well.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan. So I'm the VP of Engineering at Super. So a little bit about my journey. So I also worked at Google. Actually, I from theme from a little earlier in the talk. So I worked at Google for about 4 years in California. after graduating from Western University. So I did my trip in the United States, and then happy to be back in Canada, where I've been at Super for about 4 years. For us as a company, we started off actually in the hotel space, applying AI to hotel bookings, essentially taking the travel agent model and doing it at scale to get users good deals at scale with technology. So over the just last year, we raised quite a bit of money to be able to take what worked for us in hotels and expand it to other verticals. Which has fueled sort of a lot of the impetus for the tremendous growth we've gone through as a company. So when I joined 4 years ago, we were about 18 people total and 8 engineers. Now we're at about 250 people and about 70 engineers. And we've been tackling not just hotels, but also getting into e-commerce and fintech, and really sort of adjusted our vision and mission as a company, which is really where originally it was just about saving users money on hotels. Now it's really more holistically about how do we in general save users money for users who really need to save, not just want to save. And what that sort of means is what was refined through our hotels product. So we noticed about 60% of our users pay with debit card instead of credit card, for example, in completing a transaction. And many of our users, or most of them rather, are in the United States. So when we started diving into this, what we started to understand was that it was not because people chose to use debit, where you don't necessarily have protections like chargeback protection, you don't necessarily have protections like, or rather getting rewards for what you're spending, but rather it's because they had to, because they don't have access to credit. It's a big problem, especially in the United States. You don't have a good credit score, therefore you can't get a credit card, therefore you can't build your credit. So we started building out this fintech product for these users, and generally part of us shifting from Snap Commerce to Super was really all about creating this new ecosystem, this new brand, appealing to this demographic. So we were saying just before, so we've grown from about, over the last year, from about 20 engineers to about 70. In terms of some of the challenges and some of the interesting themes that have come out of that growth, a few of them sort of really come to mind. One is you touched on hiring and sort of the interview processes and make sure people are steered to the right places. But I think I'd summarize that also, or I'd add to that, is engineering needing to be owners of hiring, as opposed to partners, let's call it, with human resources. I found that in general, it will not get done if you don't really lean in and be an owner as an engineering group and refine your processes and own them, because at the end of the day, I think there's only so much that can be understood and that can be shared from the HR perspective, but that a lot of the times engineers know what engineers want to be asked during interviews and know the kinds of questions that should be asked and how to evaluate properly and what the process should look like. So I think so it took us a tremendous amount of effort and leaning in from our end. The next one I'd say is just in terms of, as you're growing, like organizational structure is hugely important, and thinking proactively about that. So Conway's Law, for example, the general theory that what you end up shipping and building will reflect your organizational structure and your communication structure more specifically. I think that if left to its own, without proactively thinking about this sort of thing, you'll end up in undesirable outcomes as an organization, where you're actually building things that don't speak to each other, that should be speaking to each other, or you're building things 3 times when it really should have just built it once. So I think thinking proactively about that is super important. And as a very real example for us, for example, so when we started, in order to absorb our new folks, so we ended up with this sort of similar to the Spotify squad and tribe model, where you sort of have tribes that define different engineering flavors within your organization, or different sort of disciplines, let's call it. So for us, product engineering and platform engineering and infrastructure and data. But then squads within them. But one of the things we've been thinking about more is, what is the actual scaling factor for the business? And in general, we have product teams and we have platform teams and who have to sort of communicate all the time because they're building features together? Or are we really building out verticals where we have fintech and we have e-commerce and we have hotels and we have horizontal teams that support? So I think that being proactive about that, I think, is quite important. I'll stop there.
Okay. All
Hey folks, I'm Dileshni. So when I first joined PagerDuty, it was about 350 people. Now it's close to 1,400, and engineering alone is around 300 people. In the last couple of years, we've expanded our business to the APJ, like Asia Pacific, EMEA. We have offices all over the world. We have engineering in Chile and in Lisbon. Especially in the last year, it's been quite steep growth for us. So there's like 3 areas that I would highlight that, personally I felt the challenge while we were scaling is, one on the people side is you're getting folks from different cultures, different parts of the world. How do you integrate them with engineering? Our norms, our culture, the way we even communicate has to change now from when we were just mostly North America based. The next thing is around reliability. Everyone wants PagerDuty to be on when they're having issues. We can't afford outages. So now when we have people in different time zones, different countries, like working on the same product, same code bases even, we have to scale our practices to a way that we still have our 4 nines of reliability baked into every single thing we do. And we have to have that same mindset and teach that same mindset to the new people who come in. So that's been a challenge for us. And the other part is like scalability. Anne has talked about hiring. Hiring in like Lisbon is very different than hiring in North America. When we acquired our Chile office, one of the first things the site lead said was, "Oh, I'm gonna, create my own engineering hiring loop." And I was like, "Hold up, let's take a pause. Let's take a step back and figure out why you want to do that, because the people who are interviewing now don't know how to interview for this, specific loop that you're trying to create. So like, how do we scale our interview practices? How do we scale our, documentation, our tooling, where when someone from Japan emails me at like 6 a.m. because they have a customer issue, I'm not going to see it, but I need to have some automation or self-service tools that they can help answer those questions, so they're not waiting 12 hours for me to like get to them about a high priority issue. I mean, they would page me if it was like a P1, and they would wake me, and that's what we have PagerDuty for. But yeah, those are kind of the fun challenges that we've had. And also the other thing in the last couple of years has been acquisitions. We've made a couple of pretty major acquisitions, and just the mindset of how we approach it. Andrea, who was a moderator before, she gave me some really good advice on how to approach companies that were acquired. Actually, the product suite that I lead now was a big acquisition that we made a couple of years ago. So that's been interesting and a fun challenge as well.
Awesome, that's great. Thanks very much. I like how we went along. So we first talked about hiring, you're talking about team structure, and then you talked about time zones and countries. And I think it's like the hiring and team structure were always tough before scaling. And now when you're on the complexity of time zones and cultures in different countries, it really does change things a lot. And so planning committee for next year, I think maybe that's a good topic just on itself of like what it looks like if you have a good structure and good hiring, but you overlay these time zones and countries, what that does and how folks see just that one part breakdown. And so for the rest of the structure, we're gonna have we have 2 questions that I'll be posing to the panelists, and then we'll open up for questions after that. So the first question, and you'll start us off. So Wealthsimple tripled the number of engineers in the last 2 years. What were some of the learnings from this period as you saw things starting to break up as you were adding in these engineers?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about it in my intro, but I think one of the things that we learned was, your local development environment setup. That's one of the things where every engineer has to come in and do that in order to start working. There were a lot of holes in our ability to do that, and a lot of back and forth, a lot of like, I'll start this setup script, and then there's all these errors that come up, and so you're like pip installing every single like dependency, for 2 days. And so those are the kind of things where we realized, okay, we need to fix this. We need to like make sure people can run the script and it'll run, within half an hour, and their development environment will be set up. I think the other really big hole that we had was in knowledge management. So, there was a lot of documentation everywhere. Slack was like the most used tool in our company. We had a document management system called Quip. I'm not sure if people are aware of that. I had never heard about Quip until I came to Wealthsimple. So I was used to Google Docs. Microsoft 365. But Quip had a horrible search. Sorry if anybody here works for Quip. Search functionality. So you could not find anything. It would take 2 minutes literally as you start searching for something for the queries to come up in terms of like where to find that document. So again, having that knowledge available at your fingertips really quickly. And having it be the accurate, right documentation, I think that's another thing that we worked on that helped with the onboarding. So eventually it did improve, but there were a lot of pain points in like those first few months.
From personal curiosity, around the Slack piece, like the asynchronous communication becomes so key. Did you have any best practices or like people change up how they were structuring things in Slack to really help get the communication across?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that we did in the beginning of the year was we used the Slack workflows so that when a team, for example, like a platform team would get questions about like, how do I set up my mobile development environment? They would actually have to go through this workflow and they would get asked questions. Did you check the Eng handbook? Did you check this? And so a lot of the questions were actually already answered in these places and they just had to know where to find it. And so it decreased their, like the toil on that team and the number of requests that they got by 50, 60%, just because they forced people to go through a set of questions before they requested something in that Slack channel.
Awesome, that's fantastic,
Yeah.
I love that. So Ryan, tripling your engineering staff in a time period as well. You brought up like the different structures around people and stuff like that. What did you see there that you found really interesting or really challenging during your growth stage?
Yeah, for sure. Just before getting into that, just to respond to a couple of the challenges. So it's funny how similar some of the challenges are right across all the companies, but for tool recommendations, so for initial startup local dev, so we started using Gitpod, if you're familiar.
Yep.
Really good product. So we started using that, and then actually for internal search, we saw that using Glean.
So are we? We're using it now
really?
too. Yes.
Oh, nice. All right, so there you go. So I guess same problems and same solutions.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of the other pieces other than sort of team structure that I want to, I guess, touch on is, I think the first one is about, that I spend a lot of time thinking about is, how do we maintain that competitive advantage that startups have as we scale, right? So in general, one of the, I think at least from my perspective, one of the key advantages of startups is your ability to rapidly iterate. And your also willingness to throw away things that didn't work as opposed to having an attachment to them. And I think that how I think a startup wins is by maximizing the number of iteration cycles, the speed at which you can do that, because you are going to encounter failures. The question is, how many shots do you get? So I think that for us, as we've been scaling, it's thinking about like, how do we maintain that kind of culture? How do we maintain, even though we're getting bigger, it's like within the individual atoms of the teams or the squads, how do they make it feel like they can rapidly iterate? And I think a lot of work goes into that, because I think that in general, as you grow, one of the things that hurts your ability to rapidly iterate is, I'll call it the AQ or adaptability quotient of the org. So in general, as you have more people, shift and changing is harder because more people need to buy in, more people need to get aligned. But in general, if you can constrain the number of stakeholders involved in a given decision, let's call it, or if you have a really good decision-making framework, something that allows you to actually make decisions decisively and with a small enough group that you can move quickly, it can be effective. So I think leveraging things like a decision-making framework and being conscious of how do you keep decisions in a narrow or in the implication of those decisions in a more confined area can help you maintain that advantage, I think. Another thing I want to talk about is sort of similar to adaptability things, but in general, towards the beginning of the company when we were smaller, the thing that was really dominant in terms of how successful one would be, let's call it as the IQ factor. It's an individual's intelligence and ability to deliver individually. And in general, I think you need those kinds of people in an organization and those people who are sort of those technical drivers. But I think that as we've been scaling more and more, what's really the people who are most successful are not those who drive individually, but rather those who drive through influence and drive through collective achievement. So I think that the types of people that are most impactful when you're at a startup stage are not necessarily the types of people that are the most impactful when you get a little bit bigger, because those people have to be able to scale from what I can do to what we can do. So I think that's been a pretty interesting observation as well, and making sure you're hiring the right kinds of people to be successful at that stage in your growth.
And I think that change from IC to influencing, I think anybody in a growth company has seen that at some point. Have you been able to get a chance to look at what it looks like, train and level up? I think in our first talk we were talking about managers have to look at people on the team and be like, I can get you there. I can get you to what we need to be in this new organization. Have you got to that stage in your business yet? Has it been a discussion?
Yeah, I can take it, I guess. So I would say we spend a lot of time. I think in general, when it comes to career growth and filling in those gaps, right, it's a two-way street between manager and report. A report won't really necessarily be successful without the opportunity and the guidance with the leader, but at the end of the day, the report also has to have initiative and want to get to that next level too. And everyone's intrinsic motivation and desire is different, right? Some people will want to grow into that space. Others are comfortable where they are, and both can be okay, right? So it's about understanding where do people want to go, and also understanding that it's not necessarily a linear path. That generally people hop around, IC to manager to IC, and continue their growth journey that way. So I think in general, it's about being proactive, about thinking through these things instead of being reactive in nature when things are already on fire, so to speak. And making sure you have a career leveling framework, making sure it's clear to people how to get to the next level, what the next level looks like, what is the delta. Having a sufficiently robust but as lightweight as possible performance evaluation framework, things like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Dileshni, tough to follow those two answers, but what did you see during all these growth stage? What was breaking? What was going great for your company?
There was a lot of things breaking. So I think I can talk to you a little bit about maybe the interviewing process and the things that broke when we were expanding to different countries, and also with the acquisitions that were coming in, and they were trying to get comfortable with our interview process. We had a pretty good interview process that everyone knew about. It was kind of a well-oiled machine. But then when we were hiring in Lisbon, when we were hiring especially for senior roles, we were looking for people who had worked at similar scale before, which isn't necessarily fair in a country like Portugal, where they may not have had that kind of exposure yet. And so we kept saying no, no, no to everyone. So we had to take a step back and kind of reevaluate our criteria for hiring. And then also just in a matter of just the cultural aspects of how people speak, explain their experience. I'll give you an example. When someone refers to women as girls, it triggers this response in me that I just want to walk away. And then I was in interviews for managers that we were hiring in Lisbon, and they would say, oh, I had this girl on my team, and all I wanted to do was why? Why are you calling them girls? And the site lead pulled me aside because he saw my feedback. And I was like, this is a red flag. Why is he referring to people as girls? And he only had one woman on his team of 20 engineers. And I was like, first of all, there's a language. And it seems like such common sense. But when you're in that moment, you don't realize it. And you kind of explain their cultural perspective. And just one thing is the language. They don't have as much diversity as we would in North America with engineering and tech. So that was something, especially also the same thing in Chile as well. There isn't a lot of women in more senior roles. So we kind of had to shift what should our pipeline look like for these different countries, and maybe target more diverse pipelines for junior roles, or have more internships to help grow those kind of underrepresented areas. So we kept our structure of the interview the same, but we kind of had to change the expectations and training we had to do for the interviewers. The growth around acquisitions that was a fun challenge. My previous boss, Jason Diller, is here. He can tell you the times that we kind of felt banging our head against the wall. The time we made that acquisition, we went from a single product company to a multi-product company. And that was a huge challenge. Our tools didn't expand that way. Our platform standards didn't take that into account. And there was a lot of like, oh, this product is written in Java. Are you going to rewrite everything in Elixir? And we're like, no, why would we do that? And like, our design system wasn't meant to work for multiple products. So we had all of these like challenges where we kept like running into our technology, our tools, our process was meant for a single product company, and now we had to like expand. And that is super painful, especially when you're the one trying to convince people like, hey, we need to change this. And they're like, why? It works for us. It works for the product that sells like brings in 95% of the revenue. Why do we need to change this? So that was interesting. We're much better at it now. We made another acquisition since then, so we've definitely had to like force and break some of all of our process and tooling around it. But the last year was definitely challenging during that period.
That's fantastic. One quick follow-up question. You talked about the interviewing in multiple countries, and you did some interview training. That training, was it more generic training to be like more open and accepting and try to like not, put our standards on other places, or was it more specific to countries and behaviors in countries, or what that structure looked like? What did that training look like?
Originally, we only had like very general training on like, being aware of your own bias, not asking like leading questions, being open to people coming in from different experiences. But then we did tailor it afterwards for people doing interview in Lisbon. Now they have folks who come in and say like, this is what you should be mindful of. This is what the culture in Lisbon is like. This is what tech in Lisbon is like. Same thing for Chile. The Chile recruiters sit down and talk with me and the other managers about this is what hiring in Chile looks like. This is the type of candidate that you might get. And this is how the resume might change. So we do tailor it that way now so we're more fair and we give a good experience to those candidates. At the end of the day, it's not just about us, right? We want to have we want to give a positive experience for the candidates who are interviewing with us.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. We'll move on to question 2, and it's going to be around values and maintaining them as we grow teams. And personally, one of my personal values that I've taken with every company is feedback. I actually need feedback. It's like a requirement for me. If I don't get it, I hunt it down. I found this in my life, and I think that the favorite people to work with have always been people who proactively give me feedback, especially critical feedback in moments where you think you made a mistake, you're not sure, or you have some self-doubt, and they're there to tell you, like, here's what you did great, here's what you did wrong, and I loved it. I took that into my current company, Powered by People, and asked for feedback, demanded it, set up structures, talked about it for the first 5 all hands, got no feedback from my team of 14 engineers, and after building trust with them and visiting them in Nairobi, Kenya, and hanging out with them, I finally got them to be honest with me around why I wasn't getting any feedback. And I'll date myself, but Pink Floyd The Wall was a powerful piece of music for me. It was really talking about the British system and all the stuff wrong with education. So the oldest member of my development team is 27. They had that same Pink Floyd The Wall experience of no feedback to teachers. The teacher is always right. If you're getting called up to the front of the class, it is going to be a punishment. So all the things I was doing would be like, Dileshni, I want to talk to you on an all hands. Their first thought is, I'm going to get roasted for something, I made a mistake. And I'm about to give them a big compliment on how they stood up. But because I didn't tell them in advance, I surprised them with it. It was like one of the worst moments for them. And so these values, across lots of countries, everything kind of breaks. And so right now, I have my team talking about it publicly. We're going to have a communication coach. We can joke about it now, and they want to work on it because they know globally this is there. But when you're scaling teams, how do you rely on your values? What values you realize would break down, or what would be really successful? And Dileshni, I think we'll start with you again this time.
So specifically on the feedback part, I found it easier when I first started, I was managing teams directly, and building that level of trust, that safety with the team was easier. Now when you have layers between you and the teams, it becomes even harder. So a few things that I've had to keep in mind is one, sorry, don't hit the mic, it's one. I assume everyone knows how to give feedback, especially managers. I made that assumption, which is not correct. So one of my things when someone new joins, I have a set of like Dileshni's expectations. It's not like I expect you to work X, Y, Z time. It's not that. It's more like, hey, I expect you to give feedback to your peers and your managers. Here's a framework that you can use. Lara Hogan has this really good feedback equation that you can use. It's very simple. It's a good way of saying, here's what happened, here was the impact on me, and this is what you can do differently. So just having that helps so many people, even like new managers that I was hiring that weren't really comfortable with that. And the second thing is, feedback is, you can't just assume people are comfortable giving it to you. You have to build that trust with them. So I spend a lot of one-on-ones and skip levels talking to them about, hey, you know, we had this big discussion about FY24 planning. What's something I could have done differently to help you? It's like start, stop, continue kind of thing. But don't ask them to give like start, stop, continue all at once. Just like pick one. What is something that I can stop doing? And the next one-on-one, you can ask them what's something I can continue doing. So that kind of helped them kind of break out of their shell a little bit and be like, oh, this is okay. She's not reacting badly. I can like, you know, build that trust with them. Then it's easier to have those conversations at a team level and say, okay, now that we all know how we react to, you know, giving feedback, you can talk a little bit more openly. That's how I've done it, and also continuous feedback so that no one's surprised at performance reviews. That's like my number one rule for all my managers is if someone's surprised by their feedback at performance reviews, we haven't been doing our job well.
Awesome, thanks, Dileshni. Ryan, what are your thoughts and stories around values as you've been scaling?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually just refreshed our values with our rebrand, and it was not a massive shift, but it was subtle, like tweaks, let's call it, so that they scaled properly. Because we hadn't touched our values in the 6 years since we started. But this was a good opportunity with rebrand, sort of refreshing this. One of the ones is actually related to what I was speaking about just a little bit earlier, where one of our core values was move fast, right? So build, iterate as fast as you can. And we shifted it, again, just this is a small tweak, but we shifted it to, we call it move fast with intention. So in general, if you are moving super fast, but you're really just like building the same thing again and again, are you really moving fast? I just think it's sort of like velocity versus speed. At the end of the day, velocity is that displacement over time, not just how fast you're moving at that point in time. So I think that's an important piece, especially at a bigger scale, just because naturally it is more difficult to shift direction. It is more difficult to throw things away. There are more people who are impacted by that. So in general, just trying to iterate quickly, but with thoughtfulness in mind, and not just coming at it from, all right, this is super easy, let's just do it, because it might result in a lot of rework.
Awesome. And when you look at that, like at intentionality, I always talk to my kids about it's like more hurry, less speed, right? My kids run upstairs to get their stuff to get to school as fast as possible and forget 3 things and get the one. They go back up 3 more times. What was the reaction to the teams when you're changing this, especially from like maybe the earlier stage IC hires you talked about earlier to the more influencing hires?
Well, I could say engineering was the biggest advocate for this change. I think part of it evolved from some of the complexity. You talked about new products. So for us, moving from hotels and into e-commerce and fintech and this super app to bring it sort of all together, it was kind of like new products. There also was an acquisition within that. So it introduced these new challenges. And so there was a lot more surface area for rework or building something more than once. Especially, again, as you bring on more teams and more people, and you start to lose oversight of individuals as a leader. You start looking at teams and teams of teams. So I'd say, in general, it was embraced very warmly and perpetuated sort of on the engineering front. On the product side, it was a little bit, it probably impacted that the most because that is naturally product managers and product org has to most closely dictate that pieces of like what we should be building now versus later. Like what does MVP or what is the thing that we're okay with throwing away? So that was a little bit more tricky and involved, and had some consequences in terms of having more program management, let's call it. So more cross-team sort of communication management. So it did require a few new roles to be able to fill those gaps to ensure we could move fast with intention. But in general, it was pretty welcomed by most people.
Awesome, thanks. So Anne will have the final answer to this question, and then we'll move to questions for the audience. So maybe you can think about them in advance and put your hand up in advance so the guy working the mic doesn't have to run as fast.
Yeah, so one of Wealthsimple's values is take care of each other. And in the spirit of that, when I had a team of 40 people in my org at Wealthsimple at the time, I really wanted to know what they were thinking, do sort of a team health check regularly. And so I, with help of our BizOps team, who did it for their 8-person team, I actually implemented a team pulse survey. So it's a simple Google form. They can easily answer a bunch of questions like in a minute by just clicking, how happy are you? What are some things that you're worried about? And then there's some written comments that they can put in where they can tell me like what's going well, what's not going well. And it's really a sort of a way for them to have psychological safety in providing feedback to leadership. What's wrong with the team? What's wrong with the org? What's wrong with, with me? Give me feedback. And I think that's helped a lot. And we've been doing that monthly ever since, I would say, 11 months ago. And it's a great team health check of just where's everybody at. So when we went through, people were burning out at some point in time. You could see the scores reflect that, right? And then they would have feedback for us on what can we do better? What are some things that the team is really experiencing toil on? And it's just been a great way for them to provide feedback, sort of in a safe space, and then for us to be able to implement some of the actions that we need in order to help them.
That's amazing. And with that pulse check, when you first rolled it out, and maybe over time, what kind of participation level did you get? Because I think that is also one of the things we struggle with as remote and distributed teams especially.
Exactly. So I think in the beginning we got some really, really good response rates, so 70%, 75%. So Wealthsimple went through a reduction in workforce, like a lot of companies did back in the spring. That dropped. The month after we did that, it dropped, and I think nobody wanted to say anything or do anything. It's starting to go back up again. So I feel like yes, trust went down, especially after that reduction in workforce, and now we're starting to build it back up. So it was a great. It's a great example of that.
And I think it's also a great pulse check.
Yeah.
When nobody fills it out after that.
Totally.
Did you really get an honest answer of the assessment of people are a bit nervous now, right?
Yes.
And you can face that in a different way.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So now we're open for questions in the audience.
Okay, I'm back here. Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for getting up there and sharing your experience. It's been really interesting. One thing that resonated with me was that you talked about growing from the characteristics that are successful in a startup, the individual contributor who gets in there and codes like crazy, to the characteristics that are successful in larger organizations. You're more social, your emotional quotient is more important than your coding ability. Do you see a place for the really introverted person that is initially attracted to IT in larger organizations? Can we build a role for them?
Do I volunteer to go first?
Sure. I love that question. I am an extrovert by nature, but I see that, so I'll speak to this question in terms of performance reviews and how we grew. Originally, let's say 3-4 years ago, our performance reviews were managers, directors, VP of engineering getting in a room. We talk about the people put up for promotion. And they're like, oh yes, I know about them. They spoke really great. Yes, great, we'll +1 to that promo. So it's more about the people that we heard about, the people that were outspoken. It was much easier to get promoted. And then Rob, who is in this room, yes, he came in and he put a grown-up promotion process where anyone can, so it's less like the promotion's owned by the manager, now the promotion's owned by the individual contributor. They create their own portfolio of, these are the projects I've done, this is the impact I made. So it's not so much about who's the most outspoken, who's the one that I can I hear and see the most. It's the person who's made an impact in the company, in their group. So it allows for people from different personalities, different ways of working. I have one staff engineer who is amazing at focusing and writing code and making changes in the code base that helps impact the rest of our group. And my other staff engineer, he's more of a, let me go figure this big problem out with security. So he is more well-known versus the other staff engineer. But when you put them off a promo, you're looking at their portfolio versus like how well they're known. So I think that has definitely helped. And thank you, Rob, for putting that grown-up promotion process, as I would call it. And that's definitely helped with us.
Ann, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I was gonna plus one the whole growth plan thing. That's what we call it, and yeah, it's amazing for people who do not have necessarily that extroverted side of them. And you're right, it kind of levels the playing field because it's really all about their accomplishments. And going back to like the last discussion, it's not just about the technical accomplishments and projects. You can also put in like, what did I do for this ERG? How am I increasing diversity, equity, inclusion? And all of those things are important that then the directors, VPs, and ups see and makes them get that promotion approved.
Ryan?
Yeah, I'd say from my end, I think the whole like IC track versus manager track and sort of that thing is sort of played out. In general, I mean, I think it's widely accepted as generally good practice at this point. But I think that when you think about each individual track, I think there's another dimension to it because I think that I think it's similar to what you touched on. What each staff software engineer, let's take it as an example, works on can be quite different. I don't think there's just like one type of work that a staff software engineer does, as an example. So let's take the case of, like let's say within our company. So we have one specific person I have in mind, and they are really, really top-notch technically, but they are on the more introverted side. So one of the things that I worked with him on was sort of forming a special projects team sort of around this skill set. So for example, they'd be someone who wouldn't necessarily work directly with one or a couple of teams and driving through influence, but rather at any point in time in any company, there's probably a few really key things that need to be figured out or problems that need to be solved, and then you need someone who's really good at that. So applying him to those specific problems and moving around was where we could get the most value out of them. But I will say, I think this is just a general note that I think that someone will be limited in their career at some degree, at some level, if they can't grow beyond themselves in terms of influence. It doesn't need to be, I don't think it needs to be management and formal management in general, but there's only 24 hours in a day. There's physical limit to what one person can achieve on their own. And although as impactful and great as they might be at maximizing their own personal achievement, I do think at some point it is limiting, and that your influence must be beyond yourself, I think, in order to keep growing.
Yeah, I think that's true for the growth stage. I think just getting yourself into a growing mindset, right? And I also think a big part of it is, why is someone appearing to be introverted, right? Some people are more introverted than they are, and a good manager, I think, can extract some of that stuff out. And so they're on a team. And again, back to the original topic, I think in the first section was about shared teams. Having a mix of introverts and extroverts on the teams, it can add a lot of fun, right? That you don't just have people sitting around waiting for someone to talk. Someone's telling the story, engaging, getting people to talk about their childhood, their favorite restaurants, their hobbies, can really go a long way. Two more questions over here?
Yes, so hi. Thank you all for sharing on the panel. In terms of training for like a junior engineer or maybe a new grad with a couple of internship or co-op experiences, what do you see as something that they're not taught in school that you would like to see in terms of professional development, or a pain point that you would like to see them grow more in?
Ryan, do you want to go first this time?
It's a good question. I think that, sorry, I just want to collect my thoughts to make sure I'm answering as best I can. So I think that so much of what makes a developer or junior engineer successful is, in a way someone grows, is actually really not about the technical skill at all. I think that what's emphasized through education in general is building up a certain fundamental skill level. Like, you fundamentally know how to code, right? You fundamentally know how, like, the concepts that are being talked about. But I think that what propels someone in their career ultimately, and that they kind of have to learn on the job, I find, is all those skills like project management, for example. And I don't mean like you're managing, what multiple people are working on, but just self-project management. Having a sort of internal drive or internal motivation to get something done, and having that passion to do it. To be a good communicator, whether it's communicating blockers, communicating updates, communicating new ideas that you're like, hey, I'm most familiar with what I'm working on. This is what I would recommend. I think when you look at a team composition, I find those are some of the traits that get someone ahead and get someone promoted. And again, very early in career, you can get by on just the technical skill. It will be okay, but you won't progress probably as quickly. And I think some of those not pure technical skills are potentially even a better indicator of someone's trajectory.
So I'm going to steal a word that we talked about earlier, which is curiosity. I think one thing that you don't really get taught at school is like, be curious, not just about the technology, about the code, that domain, the business, the industry, but also like people, learn about other people, and that's how you start to build relationships and become someone who can influence others. So the younger you start, the better you'll be off in your career.
Yeah, I'd agree. Curiosity is definitely the biggest thing I've noticed when you set apart like junior engineers, the ones who will ask questions after a meeting or during a meeting and say, hey, these are the things you talked about that I don't understand. Can you tell me more about it? And I had this really good intern who came in who was thinking about his career, but he also said, can I talk to people from like solutions consultants and sales? I just want to get to know what they do. And I was like, amazing. You're the first person to have asked me that. I will introduce you to them. So that kind of curiosity to see what's beyond just like, the code they write and the team they're working on is an amazing quality to have.
Awesome. I think like the project managing like core skills of everyday work and curiosity I think go hand in hand. If anybody has had to throw down about secondary education these days, I'm happy to argue that they don't do either of those things very well right now. So, next question.
Check. Okay. Thank you for your time and thoughts on the topic of scaling up. I had a follow-up question to something, Anne, that I think you mentioned, and that is the topic of scaling down. There's a lot of rapid growth and like capital injection last year. This year is a little different, and there's still a lot of uncertainty heading into next year. I wonder if there's anything that you can share with respect to considerations when it comes to scaling down gracefully or not being in a situation where you need to scale down.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of scaling down gracefully, I think the biggest challenge was really the morale, right? Because team members lost, their colleagues, teams got, I guess, downsized, and so they felt either, we're not as important as another team that didn't get touched, or our project is not as important. So I think it's dealing with that. So I think that the first thing would be like, how do you deal with sort of the fallout, right? And making sure that your team understands, yes, your projects, your work are still important, you're still really important. And then making sure that that growth and those opportunities still exist. I think that's the other thing that we're dealing with now is like, how do we make sure, even without the high rate of growth, that we have managers that are going to grow into senior managers, right? That we have staff engineers that will grow, or senior that will grow into staff. So I think making sure that you have things in place that growth and opportunity still exist, even internally without like the high rate of growth, that's really, really important to maintain.
Yeah, I think I can chime in quickly on this. One thing, especially in startups, I've seen where it's more personal and one-on-one, like over 100 people, I think you have HR, you have a more structure, is to be prepared for people who went to shock. Right? Literally people, I saw a woman the first time a startup in Valley, we were laying people off, and she just went into shock, walked out in her car and drove home right after she found out, and like super dangerous, right? And so I think that like when you have that person first mentality, I think is just a core part of it, that this is a person that's gonna get some really bad news today, I think is a great starting point for some of this. I don't know, Ryan, Dileshni, if you wanna add anything onto the gracefully downsizing?
We've been fortunate. With our, we haven't had any downsizing, but we are trying to be mindful of how we plan for next year. We're still a high growth company and we will continue to hire, but our prod dev organization, the way we're planning is to say, what are the things we can get done if we assume flat headcount? So we're saying no to more things than we are saying yes. Literally, my roadmap for our group has a red line, and we keep pushing things below the line saying, this is what we're going to say no to, and we only focus on the most important things. And that's helped, I think, the morale of our group and our engineers as well, because they can see that we're not trying to do too much. We're not trying to burn people out, and we're trying to be realistic given the economy and like the uncertainty around the economy, especially for next year. We don't know what's going to happen. A lot of customers are, our customers are being mindful of their spend. They may, collapse their tool. They may keep their spend the same. They may reduce their spend. So we want to be mindful of that in terms of how we plan.
Ryan, do you have any thoughts on planning for 2023?
Yeah, I'd say in general, so although we haven't had to do downsizing with the most recent cycle, actually for us being in the hotels business, we had to do some right when COVID hit, right? Because people weren't booking hotels at that point in time. So in general, I've had to go through this process, and I think that one of the most important pieces, just to add on to what others have said, is just doing your best to ensure soft landings, right? Making sure that people senior in the organization or people who have contacts that they are leveraging that network and offering that support to people. And I think that when you see, unfortunately, company after company over the last 6 months, let's say, going through this process, what you ended up seeing also is some companies praised for how they handled it, and some companies absolutely decimated over how they handled it, right? And I think a lot of it had to do with, of course, just the human element of how you communicate, but also just ensuring that your people, they see you as doing right by them as best as you can, ensuring that they land softly somewhere that they can be successful, that you're doing your best as you can as a leader to ensure that's the case, and providing the adequate resources and things like that. So just to add on to what others have said.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right, with that, I think we're a wrap, but I would ask everybody to join me in a round of applause for our three amazing panelists. Thank you.